Planet Reddit. Today's story is...
My family treated me like an ATM after ignoring me for 20 years, until my grandparents discovered their secret. Ever since I was little I always knew that I wasn't my parents' favorite. My younger sister Em always received all their attention and support, no matter how many times she made the wrong decisions. I got used to fending for myself. With a lot of effort, I managed to pay for my university studies by combining scholarships and part-time jobs, until I got a good job with a stable salary. Despite having achieved everything on my own, my parents never seemed really impressed. For years I tried to brush it off and move on, thinking that one day they would value my independence. On the other hand, Emma's life has been a constant roller coaster. She married at a young age, but her first marriage lasted only 2 years because her husband was unfaithful. She soon remarried and had 2 more children, but this second marriage also failed when her husband developed a gambling addiction that led to them losing their house. By the time I was building my professional career, Emma was on her 3rd marriage and already had 6 children in total, aged between 12 and 2. Her current husband works part-time as a delivery driver while trying to start his own business, but it's barely enough to live on. My parents have always been there to rescue Emma, paying her expenses here and there, always finding reasons to justify why she needed a little more help. For a while, I was so focused on my own life that I didn't get involved in Emma's constant problems, but then I started to notice a change in how my parents treated me. They became more attentive, they called me more often, they spoke well of my work and they often invited me to family dinners. I thought they were finally proud of me, and as a part of me had been waiting for this for years, I guess I wanted to believe that they really were changing. Last month I was invited to dinner. At first everything seemed normal. We talked about work and caught up on family news, and for a moment, I truly felt part of the family in a way I had never experienced before. But then the conversation took a turn. They started talking about Emma, mentioning how difficult it was for her to raise 6 children on one salary, how my parents had done everything they could to help her, but they were already running out of resources. They went on to say how lucky I was to have a good job and stability, how I had no one depending on me and that I was in a position to help the family. Then came the real surprise. They wanted me to take care of Emma financially. They had a whole plan prepared. First, they wanted me to buy her a new 5-bedroom house because her current rental apartment was too small for a family of 8. They wanted me to set up college funds for their 6 children, something they said would be fair since I was the one who could afford it. They wanted me to give her $5,000 a month to cover her basic needs and give her seed money to start a blog about motherhood. In total, they were expecting approximately $2 million to start, plus ongoing financial support. I was completely speechless. They weren't asking me for a small favor. They were asking me for a lifelong commitment, practically making me Emma's financial insurance. At that moment I realized that their recent kindness was not because they finally valued me as a son. It was because they saw me as a source of money for Emma. I told them that although I was willing to help out with small expenses from time to time or in emergencies, I didn't feel comfortable taking on such a big financial responsibility. At that moment, the calm conversation about we are family changed completely. My mother started crying, saying that I was abandoning the family when they needed me most, and my father directly called me selfish and ungrateful. They said that I was showing my true personality and that they were disappointed in the person I had become. The dinner ended with them leaving very angry. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. Within hours, Emma started flooding my phone with messages accusing me of ruining her children's future. She even got her kids to send me messages saying things like, "Uncle doesn't love us anymore." It was too much. So after a while I blocked their numbers. I couldn't believe the situation had gone this far just because I refused to fund my sister's life. The next day, my grandmother, my father's mother, suddenly called me. Apparently, my parents had been telling the whole extended family that their successful son was going to take care of everything for Emma, even before asking me. They had painted a picture for everyone about how Emma would move into a big new house, how all her financial problems would be solved and that I would be the one to give her everything she needed. Now that I had refused, they were facing enormous embarrassment. As the family expected me to comply based on what my parents had presumed ahead of time, my grandparents were horrified when they heard the full story. They had always thought that Emma's lifestyle was supported by her various husbands and that my parents were helping out of their own choice, not because they had gone into debt to support her. They were so upset by my parents' behavior that they now threatened to remove them from their will. They told me that they would rather leave their inheritance to me and my cousins who really care and don't take advantage of others. When this whole problem started circulating through the family, I began to receive calls from relatives who contacted me to offer their support. Some said they had no idea how much I had been struggling on my own and apologized for not having noticed it before. My aunt, my mother's sister, even called to tell me she regretted not having noticed how differently they treated me while I was growing up. Family relationships were starting to fall apart with everyone choosing sides, and my parents were not handling the situation well. My phone started ringing non-stop again, this time with my parents alternating between angry and bitter messages and crying voicemails. They were furious that I was damaging their reputation within the family. At one point, they left a message saying that I was ruining Emma's children's lives and that one day I would regret this decision. Then they would beg me to reconsider, saying things like we are family and family helps each other. All of this has me completely confused. Part of me feels guilty because I grew up believing that family is the most important thing, and it's hard to stop thinking that way. But another part of me is exhausted, realizing how long I've been trying to get approval from people who only seem to care when they can get something from me. Realizing this hurts, but I know that if I accept now, it will only mean years of being financially and emotionally drained, putting Emma's needs above my own life. Now I'm here, writing on Reddit because I really don't know what to do next. Do I stand firm and maintain my boundaries knowing it's the healthiest thing for me? Or is there some middle ground I'm not seeing? I really need some serious advice on this situation. Update 1. The situation with my family has become more complicated than I imagined. A few days after I told my grandparents everything, they kept their word and changed their will. They acted quickly and contacted their lawyer to make sure my parents were left out of the inheritance. My grandparents have always been calm people who prefer to avoid conflict, so this was something unprecedented in our family. But it seems that my parents' favoritism towards Emma for so many years was the last straw. My grandparents went further and organized a family meeting to clear things up. They did it by video call so that everyone could participate, including me even though I live far away. They wanted the whole family to understand exactly what was going on. And from some of the things they mention, I felt that they were going to reveal information that even I didn't know. The meeting included aunts, uncles, cousins and basically any relative who could be affected by this situation. When the meeting started, my grandparents got straight to the point. They revealed that for years they had been sending my parents large amounts of money to help both Emma and me with our studies and future plans. In total, they had given my parents more than $200,000. That money was supposed to be divided between Emma and me to support us equally. I was speechless when I heard this. I had worked my way through university combining scholarships, student loans and various part-time jobs, struggling to maintain a balance between work and classes. Meanwhile, Emma lived as if money were no object, constantly being rescued from every bad decision. All those years, I had fended for myself while my grandparents sent money from which I never received anything. My grandparents were furious. They had thought that the money was helping both of us, but now that they knew how my parents had used it, they felt completely betrayed. They had made it clear to my parents that they wanted to support us both equally, but it turned out that the money had mainly gone to Emma, covering her failed marriages, rent payments and who knows what else. They demanded a detailed explanation from my parents of how every dollar had been spent, threatening to take the matter to court if they didn't comply. For a family as private as ours, this was unthinkable, but it was clear that they had reached the end of their patience. In addition, my grandparents announced that they would set up trust funds for each of the grandchildren, including Emma's 6 children. They made it clear that this money would be managed by an external professional and could only be used for specific things such as education or medical expenses. It was obvious that they didn't want my parents or Emma to have access to these funds, which gave me great relief. At least I knew that Emma's children would have the opportunity of a stable future without my parents depleting those accounts for other things. After the family meeting, everything exploded. Relatives started contacting me one after another as they began to understand the full situation. Apparently, this was not the first time that my parents had asked other relatives for money with the excuse of helping the children or covering family emergencies. An aunt told me that she had lent several $1,000s to my parents when Emma's second marriage failed, thinking it was for basic needs. Another cousin mentioned that my parents had asked for money when I started university, saying it was to help me get started, but I never saw any of that money. Some relatives were angry because they felt they had been deceived about the destination of their money. Others were sad because they hadn't realized how much my parents had favored Emma over me. One of my cousins even showed me screenshots of conversations with my parents from when I graduated from college. In fact, they had discouraged the family from coming to my graduation, saying that I wanted something small and didn't want to make a big fuss. Meanwhile, I had been hoping that my family would come and celebrate with me. It hurt a lot to see how they had actively tried to minimize my achievements while always going out of their way for Emma, but what surprised me most was that Emma herself started to contact me. She sent me several long emails, each with a different tone. In one, she tried to act as if she had always supported me, saying that she never realized the favoritism our parents had shown her and that she always thought we were close. In another, she presented herself as a victim of our parents' manipulation, saying that they had blinded her to the reality of our family dynamic. But what stood out in each message was that somehow it always included a plea for help during this difficult time. She was trying to act as if we were suddenly best friends, but it was clear that she was still hoping I would open my wallet for her. It was hard to believe that, even after my grandparents had taken such drastic measures to set things right, even after the whole family's reaction, Emma still managed to make everything revolve around her and what she could get out of me. I felt like I was watching the same story repeat itself over and over again. She seemed unable to understand boundaries or that I no longer wanted to be her endless source of support. I was determined not to let myself be manipulated back into that role. While this was going on, my parents were busy with their own campaign. I was bombarded with voicemails ranging from angry outbursts to tearful pleas. In one message, my mother accused me of destroying the family, saying that I would regret it when I realized how much I had hurt everyone. In the next one, my father begged me to reconsider, saying that we could sort things out privately and that it didn't have to be a big deal. They even tried to make me feel guilty, saying that I was putting my grandparents in an awkward position and that I needed to think about how they would feel if the family was divided by all this, but their tactics weren't working. My grandparents were supportive and the rest of the family were seeing my parents for who they really were. Some even called to tell me they were proud of me for standing my ground. My aunt called in tears, apologizing for not seeing how differently my parents had treated me over the years. She said she had always thought I was just more independent and didn't need as much support. But now she realized that I had been forced into that role because my parents had placed so much emphasis on Emma. As the family began to see everything that had been going on, more people came forward with apologies or stories about things they had noticed over the years. It was bittersweet. Part of me felt relieved that the truth was finally coming out, that people were recognizing the sacrifices I had made for my own sake. But another part of me felt like I was reliving years of pain and rejection. All those moments when I had felt invisible. All those moments when I had wondered why my achievements didn't seem to matter so much. It all made sense now, but it didn't erase the years of feeling like I was less important. The fallout from all of this has been exhausting. My parents still refuse to accept responsibility for any of it. They are so concerned about the family's reputation that they can't see the damage they have caused. For them, this is just another argument that should be let go for the sake of peace, and they are desperate to keep this whole situation a secret, but I no longer feel guilty about standing up for myself. I think I'm finally seeing how important it is to set boundaries, even with family. If I give in now, it will only mean more years of being used and taken for granted. For the first time, I feel like I'm in control of my own life. My grandparents have assured me that they will take care of my parents if they try to take this any further. They have made it clear that they don't want me to feel pressured and even told me that if my parents try to continue causing problems, they are prepared to take additional measures to protect me. Just knowing that I don't have to go through this alone has made a big difference. I now wonder what family means at this point. All these years, I thought being a good son and brother meant putting everyone else first, sacrificing my own needs to make sure everyone else was okay. But now I realize there is a limit. And family shouldn't make you feel like an ATM or ignore your own happiness just because it's convenient. As everything continues to unfold, I am standing by my decision, but there is a part of me that wonders if I should be doing something more or handling this differently. I would really appreciate any advice on how to move forward. There is still a lot to process and I am trying to take things one day at a time. Update 2. Just a few days after my grandparents announced the changes to the will, my parents finally broke their silence. Instead of apologizing or admitting that they might have overstepped the mark, they sent a long, carefully calculated email that tried to justify every decision they had made. Not only did they defend favoring Emma, they practically celebrated it, calling it an investment because Emma, they said, had always been more family-oriented. Meanwhile, they described me as independent and focused on my career, which apparently meant that I didn't need as much support. They went on to explain that their request for me to take financial responsibility for Emma wasn't about money at all. They saw it as a way of balancing things out, helping Emma have the same advantages they thought I had had on my own. To make matters worse, they called me selfish for not wanting to share my supposed excess of money with my family. The email was not just words. They attached a list detailing everything they claimed to have spent on me versus Emma. They included everything, down to basic childhood things like food, clothing and housing. For Emma, they listed her wedding expenses, house payments and even things like therapy after their divorces. They even put a line about Emma's emotional support during her adolescence, marked priceless. It was so ridiculous that I realized they had been thinking about these things for a long time, probably waiting for the moment to throw them in my face. Apparently, they had also shared this email with the whole extended family, hoping to paint me as the selfish one. But it backfired. Relatives who had been neutral began to contact me, surprised by what they saw as an absurd attempt to charge me for basic upbringing. Some even apologized for not realizing the level of favoritism I had had to endure. I think my parents expected people to take their side, but all they did was push everyone further away. Adding to all this, my grandparents' lawyer got involved. My grandparents had always thought that any money they had given my parents over the years was being divided between Emma and I for our education and other necessary expenses. Now, they were discovering that the money had gone towards things like Emma's weddings and her various failed relationships. The lawyer sent my parents an official letter demanding a detailed explanation of where the money had gone. The grandparents were willing to take this to court if necessary and, honestly, I didn't blame them. They felt betrayed and so did I. It was like a twisted web of deceit that had been building for years without my knowledge. Surprisingly, Emma's first ex-husband contacted me. He is the father of her two eldest children, and although we had never been close, we had always got on well. He told me that he had found out about everything that was going on and wanted to share his side of the story. He revealed that my parents had pressured him to marry Emma when she became pregnant, promising him financial support if he went ahead with the marriage. I knew that the marriage had been rushed, but I hadn't realized that my parents had been so involved. Apparently, most of the support my parents had given came from the money they had received from my grandparents. Money that my grandparents thought was going towards Emma's and my future. Emma's ex even apologized, saying he regretted not standing up to them and letting things get out of hand. My parents quickly realized that the email wasn't having the effect they'd hoped for. They tried to backtrack. They sent a follow-up message to everyone saying that the original email had been written in anger and shouldn't be taken too seriously. It was hard to believe that excuse when their email had clearly been planned for some time. It was so detailed that they could have printed it out and sent it as an official document. Trying to backtrack now only made them look worse and nobody believed them. Emma had been quiet for a few days after the family meeting, but then she started contacting me again. Her tone had changed from making me feel guilty to something more desperate. She sent a few emails saying that she had always loved me and that she hadn't realized that our parents had treated us so differently. She even tried to turn her situation around, saying that she had never wanted to be a burden to me, but that she was in a difficult situation with her children. Her messages became stranger, alternating between childhood memories and reminders of how difficult things were for her with 6 children and a troubled husband. At one point she talked about her husband's business problems and hinted that her children were having difficulties at school because of all the stress at home. It was hard not to feel some sympathy for Emma and her children, but at the same time I couldn't ignore everything that had happened. She had known about our parents' favoritism for years and had taken advantage of it while I was fending for myself. Now that she was in trouble, she wanted me to step in and bail her out. Her emails didn't make me angry so much as they made me sad. She was my sister and her children were not to blame for any of this, but it was not my responsibility to rescue her from a situation she had helped to create. More family members began to come forward with stories. One of my aunts got in touch, apologizing for never having said anything when she noticed that things didn't seem fair between Emma and me. She remembered times when my parents clearly ignored me and favored Emma, but she hadn't wanted to get involved at the time. She even mentioned that she had once offered to help me with my university applications, but my parents had rejected her, saying that I had everything under control. In reality, I was handling everything on my own, juggling school applications and work. My aunt said she hadn't realized how much they had left me alone to handle things. And she felt guilty for not having intervened sooner. The family chat groups became very uncomfortable. Relatives kept contacting me to ask if I needed anything or if there was anything they could do to help. It was strange to suddenly have all these people offering help and support, especially as they had never been involved in my life before. I appreciated their kindness, but it was overwhelming. Part of me felt that I shouldn't need that support now. I had already gone through the hardest parts on my own. Mostly I just thanked them, not sure what else to say. Even my parents' closest friends began to distance themselves. Some had believed their version that I was a hard worker who didn't care about family. But after reading the email and hearing more details, they began to see through my parents' excuses. Some even reached out to apologize, admitting that they had been wrong to judge me. One of them even mentioned that my parents had borrowed money from them, saying it was for family needs. They believed it was for basic expenses, but now they wondered if they had actually been financing Emma's lifestyle. Despite everything, my parents kept insisting. They kept sending messages, saying that I owed them for everything they had done for me, that I was responsible for keeping the family together and that my refusal to support Emma was destroying the family. They said that I was ruining everything, damaging their reputation, hurting Emma's children. It was frustrating because they were ignoring their own actions, pretending that none of this was their fault. For now, I'm standing firm. I refuse to be persuaded to fix problems my parents created or to take responsibility for Emma's decisions. It's still hard to believe that this is my family, that things have reached a point where I have to choose between my own well-being and what they call family loyalty. It's a lot to process and, honestly, I don't know what the future will bring, but for the first time I feel like I'm standing up for myself and finally being heard. That, at least, is a step in the right direction. Update 3. The situation has reached a kind of end. One that no one in the family could have imagined. My grandparents, after all the mess and the hidden problems that came to light, decided to take a firm stand. They organized one last family meeting, in this time with their lawyer present. It felt unreal, as if a chapter was closing with so many wounds and feelings still unresolved in the air. However, this was not just for talking. My grandparents had a plan and they didn't want to waste any more time. They announced that they had not only updated their will, but were taking immediate action with their properties to prevent any further misuse. For years, my parents had been living rent-free in a family vacation home. It was supposed to be temporary, but my parents had made it their permanent home. They thought the house would eventually be theirs, but that is over now. My grandparents are selling the property and plan to use the money to create educational funds for all the great-grandchildren in the family. This includes Emma's children, as well as my cousin's children. To make it clear that there would be no more misappropriation of funds, my grandparents also submitted a reorganization plan. They are creating annual scholarships for any family member seeking higher education or professional certifications, but these funds will be managed by an independent administrator without the participation of family members. Upon hearing this, my parents looked completely surprised. Losing the free house was bad enough, but realizing that they would have no future access to my grandparents' money was a reality check they did not expect. For the first time, they didn't argue, or at least they knew it wouldn't help. They just looked defeated, which was strange to see in my parents after all the years of pride and control. My grandparents gave them 60 days to move out of the property and there would be no extensions. The lawyer presented them with a signed document and my parents had no choice but to accept. Surprisingly, my parents also admitted to some financial errors relating to educational funds my grandparents had given them years ago. This was a big revelation and many family members were shocked. Without many options, my parents signed a formal repayment agreement, although I'm sure it will be difficult for them. They will move to a small apartment once they leave the property and will have to greatly reduce their lifestyle. It is clear that this is a huge change for them. They have lived comfortably off family support for so long that I don't think they ever imagined they would have to make a budget or cut back. Emma, meanwhile, seems to have accepted the reality of the situation too. Her support system is basically crumbling around her. My parents' free help will no longer be there and she can no longer depend on them to pay her bills or help her if her husband's businesses fail. But instead of complaining or trying to make me feel guilty anymore, she is finally taking steps to change things for herself. She has enrolled in a medical billing and coding program, something that should give her a steady income and the opportunity to support her children on her own. Her husband has taken more hours at his delivery job and seems to be making an effort to help with the family expenses. Emma even sent me an email, not asking for money, but simply asking for help with her CV. I agreed to look it over, thinking it was a small way to help without encouraging her dependence. What has probably been the most surprising and moving change is hearing from Emma's children. They contacted me through their father, Emma's first husband. Apparently my grandparents had arranged for them to go to family therapy. They had been carrying a lot of confused feelings about the family dynamic and had become caught up in the middle of so much drama. Now, with the help of the therapists, they are beginning to understand the complicated relationships and favoritism they grew up with. The older children apologized for the guilt-tripping messages they sent when all this started. They said they hadn't realized how much pressure their mother was putting on me and that they felt bad about how they had been used as pawns. I told them it was okay and that none of this was their fault. They are just kids, after all, and they were only following their mother's example. I am hopeful that therapy will help them understand that they are not responsible for fixing the problems between the adults in their lives. While my parents seem to be accepting their new reality, they are finding it hard to accept it completely. In a last-ditch attempt to change the story, they started sending me random photos from my childhood, each one with messages like "Remember when we were a happy family?" and "Don't forget who's been there from the start." I'm not sure if they're really trying to make amends or if it's just another tactic to play with my emotions. Some messages talk about how much they sacrificed to raise me, while others present them as victims abandoned by everyone they cared about. They've also been telling anyone who will listen that the family has turned against them, presenting the whole situation as if they were innocent victims who only wanted to help Emma. But I think most of the family sees through this now. They're keeping their distance and relationships are now polite but distant. As for me, this whole experience has been an eye-opener. I had no idea how deep the favoritism went or how much my family had been manipulated over the years. My grandparents have been incredible throughout this whole process, showing a strength and fairness that I never fully appreciated before. They are stepping up to protect the next generation, making sure there are safeguards in place to prevent what happened to me and Emma from happening again. The whole experience has been tough but a necessary reality check. It has shown me who really cares about me and who only saw me as someone to lean on for money. In the end, I'm grateful for the people who have stood by me.